certain circles in the Western political elite who do want the nuclear war. They want to go to nuclear war. And these individuals in the Western A price community were dying very young. And what they all had in common was a lot of cod liver oil. So no, most supplements are toxic and trash. So they know in the upper echelons what the hell right nutrition is.
When it comes to some people on the internet, when you find out about them, you will not be able to get enough of them. You watch all of their interviews, all of their videos, you read all of their stuff. You find that consuming the information that they provide is enriching to the soul, basically. And when it comes to Varis Ahmad, a regenerative farmer, a polymath, and a polymath is someone who is extremely knowledgeable in many fields, that is the case. This is a conversation with Varis Ahmad, and I assure you, you will not be disappointed. In fact, you will become addicted to his videos.
Okay, name is Varis Ahmad. I basically am by profession a regenerative farmer. I've been doing that now for 7 years, 8 years almost. Regenerative farming is basically biodynamic farming, holistic cell grazing with animals, putting them like on a plot of land in a holistic manner, which actually heals and regenerates the land. It's not like a cage operated feeding, and it's in a sustainable and regenerative way that I farm. And I consult clients and I help them design a farm on new plots of land which they purchased. Most often that's what I'm doing. Also water harvesting techniques with swales. Fun career, amazing job. I'm also a polymath, so I've had the great privilege for the last, let's see, how long now? 13 years, I have been funded by certain people to simply pursue my own studies and experiment on myself and learn whatever I want to learn. With part of the contract being, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't party, I don't do any of that. I don't have a social circle. I just learn. That's what I do. And I was funded. My whole life was funded to do that. At a young age, I was initiated into certain Sufi orders, Naqshbandi and Chishti, Islamic esoteric orders. And I was given rigorous philosophical training, philosophical and psycho-spiritual training at that point. And throughout my duration of life, nutrition were one of the many interests which I had. And that ties in with a lot of the other interests I have, which is comparative religion, philosophy, mythology, cultural anthropology, history, et cetera, et cetera. And when it came to nutrition, I found that the ones I appreciated the most and who I resonated the most was, or who I resonated with the most were Augenus Wander planets and also some of the raw vegans, but that's not suitable for everybody. But there's a certain way it can happen, it can be optimal. But in general, I would say I'm a raw food advocate. I'm a big raw food advocate for nutrition. I believe that's the best way to go.
So the thing is, you know a lot about the world. You, of course, are a polymath, and that is that you know a lot about many different subjects. And something that is happening right now is people are basically being treated like cattle. People go into, the normal way of doing things is you go to school, then you go to, some other school, then you go to university, and then you work, you pay taxes, and some other people that are, the elite basically benefit. So when it comes to escaping a 9 to 5 or really living in a way that humans are supposed to, is becoming a regenerative farmer, is that a good alternative, or what alternatives do we have that you would recommend?
If you cannot get into entrepreneurship, because I do believe that entrepreneurship, you have to have an entrepreneurial spirit to do that. Not everybody is business orientated. We're all made differently. The best alternative option for the majority of people is to get into regenerative farming by far. And you'll meet like-minded individuals and you can get onto a plot of land. You'll find the people. There's always communities who want people who have the spine and the muscle and the energy to pick up a shovel and work on the farm. And that is the best way to get out of the system. And you have a community that supports you, a lot of good food, fresh air, fresh water, and you'll be living on the land. And typically these types of individuals are individuals who are plugged out of the matrix. They're not plugged in. So you'll resonate very well with them.
The thing is, what I've learned when it comes to escaping the 9 to 5 is that there are two alternatives, and that is go off grid, so become a farmer, get out of the system, or be on as many grids as possible. So get a lot of money, be located in many countries, have many bank accounts, and then do whatever you want because you have, some currency that we've created, and you have numbers on a screen, and you trade that for things basically.
Yeah, so that requires, some degree of entrepreneurship, figure out how to make money outside the system on your own, generating your own business or something. Use your mind to get out. You can use your mind to get out, or you can use your body, physical labor, and get on the farm.
Which one do you think is the most optimal?
It depends on the individual. Some people are, very mentally orientated. They don't have the physical energy to farm, but they have a lot of mental energy and they can figure out a way to dig themselves out. Others, they don't really have the mental resources or creativity to come up with some type of endeavor or business, but they have very strong bodies. And in that case, go on the farm and pick up the shovel and they'll love you. All farms, sustainable farms, are looking for people like that. We're willing to, take care of the animals, plant trees, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that's certainly a great alternative for people who don't want to stress themselves out, basically, and live in the inner city and so on and so forth. Now,
Yeah,
something that we have in common is we both love Augenus, basically. The
very much.
guy, the guy made raw meat. Uh, he reintroduced the food group of raw animal products, basically. And funnily enough, I believe that's the most important food group. But when I listen to your interviews on, Carnivore Camaraderie, Joey Schwartz, it seems like you disagree with him on a few things. So could you tell me, what do you think Augenus got wrong?
With Augenus, well, he didn't get much wrong. He didn't get really much wrong at all. What it is he's more careful, and I learned that from him, to be careful, but I'm not as careful as him. So he says, don't go in the steam room, it will burn the cells in your lungs. And I say, well, no, come on, it's still therapeutic. I still feel the benefit from it. Let's use the steam room. Certain things, he didn't get much wrong at all, really. He was such a genius. And then there's maybe some fundamental difference here. And, this can go off on a big tangent. Naturally, in the natural world, the raw animal foods are the best food. And if you were born eating raw foods and drinking raw milk and your mother's raw breast milk and you had a good birth and you weren't given certain things into your body, from the medical profession, you could very easily live 120 to 140, very easily. No physical degeneration, no autoimmunity, no disease. That's very plausible. And there's many examples of that through the various indigenous cultures. However, my take on this whole thing is that, yes, even now, if we go on that kind of a diet, you'll get very strong and you'll get very healthy. But the problem is a lot of us we were raised improperly. We ate junk food, we ate candy or seed oils, antibiotics, junk food. And so by the time we're 30, like I'm 31 in a few weeks, my organ function, because I did have leaky gut at one point. And if you have leaky gut, then these leaking food particles, they damage your liver, they damage your kidney, they damage your joints, they damage your brain, they damage all of your organs. So for the years that I had that, and I damaged my organs, I probably aged very fast. And now at 31, I have the organ function of like a 70-year-old indigenous man, an 80-year-old indigenous man. Does that make sense? We've been damaged. So we're aging very, very fast. And essentially all these autoimmune disorders and leaky gut, these diseases, what it is people are so damaged, the body's breaking down rapidly, very fast. Where it should have taken 120, 140 years, it's now taking 20, 30, 40 years to break down people very rapidly, and they're falling apart. So yeah, naturally raw animal foods are great, but we are in exceptional times where we have a lot going against us. If we just go back on what's natural, it'll be very therapeutic, very beneficial. But my question is there a way beyond nature? Is there a way where we can do even better than nature? And I am of the belief that yes, that is possible. What is it? And I'll explain. There is an institute, the world's oldest natural health institute, called the Hippocrates Health Institute. They've been around for 60 years now, and the director are Brian and Anne-Marie Clement. They've been the directors for like 3-4 decades now. And I've been to the institute myself, And it's a vegan diet, but it's not an ordinary vegan diet. Majority of vegan diets almost always are horrible. The starch-based, the fruit-based especially will destroy you, it will kill you. Um, the soy conventional vegan diet with all the soy burgers and soy cheese are horrible, of course. And I even wrote a book called The Vegan Agenda Exposed. So, but what they're doing at this institute is pretty unique. And you'll have to hear me out. What they are doing is that they are getting seeds from different plants. Mung bean, broccoli, alfalfa, clover, sunflower, different seeds, and then they sprout them into this tiny little sprout. It takes like 5 to 7 days to sprout it, and it's growing at the time. And then they harvest those, or some of them, they don't plant them in soil, they grow them in like a jar. And they put all of those onto a plate like a sprout salad. It's a big salad of living food. And this kind of a plate is very different from like you go to the grocery store and you buy the microgreens in a salad, you know, in the plastic box, they have the microgreens, like little spinach and that. I mean, that stuff is weeks old. It's grown in hydroponic water. It's not really mineral dense. This is like living food. It's alive at the time when you're consuming it. And what it does, well, what it doesn't do first, it won't build your body. It won't make you strong. It won't make you develop big mass, be as strong like indigenous person. So I don't think it's smart for young people, especially not like you, and not even for me yet. But for older people, it's very smart when they're done developing. And what it does is, first off, because it's living, it's alive at the time when you chew into it, you're getting electromagnetic energy. Are you familiar with this concept like chi or prana?
Yeah, sort of.
So everything in nature that's alive has a living spirit inside of it, has living electricity inside of it. And when you eat a living food like this, you're getting more of this living electricity. And the longevity of the body is not so much reliant on vitamins and minerals and proteins and fats. It's reliant on the spirit in the body, on the body itself, having adequate amounts of vital energy. As soon as the body cannot house enough energy, the body gives out and the soul leaves. A diet like this is a very easy way of replenishing the body with natural electric force, spiritual force. You're feeding the body on a spiritual level. If you were to get on it now, you would get very skinny. So it's not optimal. But in old age, for example, cooked meat, nobody can really say that they eat cooked meat and then they can go for a mile run, a cooked steak. Make sense? Nobody. You need to rest and digest. A diet like that, though, where you're eating these sprout salads, when you're done eating it within 5-10 minutes, you feel like a gazelle. You're jumping around. You're like, wow, I have all this energy. So you see, for longevity, and the thing is also that, say I'm going to eat a steak, especially if it's cooked. Raw is different. Raw is a lot easier because you have the hormones, the oxygen, enzymes, beneficial bacteria. Doesn't require as much stomach acid. That's why I'm a big raw food advocate and digest better. Like, especially if you're eating cooked, you have most of the nutrition in there is dead. And then you have to secrete a lot of stomach acid, a lot of enzymes from your pancreas, a lot of protein and fat digesting enzymes to digest the steak. And then it takes 2-3 days for it to move out of you if you're not drinking coffee, which is a drug. And so this requires a lot of energy. And as you age, this gets more and more tiring. And again, as I said, if you have leaky gut and you had damaged organs, your organs are already tired. And so now putting cooked steak in it every single day is going to be exhausting. It's going to take energy out of you. In old age, if you eat only these sprouts, it hardly requires any stomach acid, hardly requires any digestive enzymes. And the majority of it is digested in your colon through the bacterial fermentation by bacterial cultures. So you're not using digestive energy to digest this food, but the bacteria are digesting it for you. And it synthesizes vitamins and minerals for you. And you literally feel like a gazelle, literally a gazelle, a very fast gazelle. And I was on the diet for 2 years. And I can tell you this, the word fatigue wasn't in my dictionary. There's no such thing as fatigue on that kind of a diet. I could run all day for 12 hours and I would not get tired. Energy is boundless. Mental clarity is incredible because you have all this living and energy in you. I was lean, skinny, strong. I wasn't like fruitarian. You know, the fruitarians look very sick. The vegans look very sick, shriveled face. This makes you kind of just look like I was 25, 26, but I look 13. Very lean and strong, but skinny as well. Compact. Then I came across Augenis Vonderplanet's work and Weston A. Price's work, and I was like, wow, raw animal foods, that's interesting. I wonder if I did this, what would happen? And I did it. I went on a raw animal food diet journey and I gained 70 pounds of mass. And I grew my wisdom teeth out. So you see, they're different. One is great for energy. The other is great for building and developing the body in a very healthful way. And again, you can, on an autogenous type of diet, you can go to 100 and you'll detox very slow and you'll feel great. Your energy will be far better than cooked carnivore. I think cooked carnivore is kind of a joke compared to raw food. But there, for certain old people, for many old people, it would be unethical for me to tell them, do not look into this living food diet as well. Try that out and see how you feel. When I was there at the Institute, I saw 60, 70-year-old women come in on wheelchairs. And by the third week, they were dancing and smiling. It's powerful. It really is. And again, both the commonality is the raw food element. But that was a long trope. I hope it clarified my stance here on where I do disagree with autogenous. I think that there can be room for a living food diet. I don't even like to call it vegan because it's totally different from veganism, but there could be more optimal whole health obtained in old age on a living food diet.
So, with that in mind, if you're old, do you not need things like, you know, nutrition only found in animal foods? So B12, this and that, you know, nutrients in general. Do you feel like, well, you can just cut all of that out? You can cut out saturated fat, you can cut out cholesterol, and you'll still be fine.
It's not that you won't need it. You do need it, but not as much because you're not growing and developing anymore. So, I'm not dogmatic about it. I would say if you're going to go that way, when you're craving chicken soup, you should have the chicken soup. When you're craving like a steak, have the steak. But people have to experiment for themselves. They'll find as they age, if you're eating cooked meat every single day, you may end up feeling a little tired and fatigued, and then you'll need coffee. And a lot of people are on hormone replacement therapies because these cooked foods, they exhaust their glands, they exhaust the adrenal gland and thyroid gland. And that's based off of not only Autogenous' work, but someone else who Autogenous also looked up to, who was Dr. Francis Pottinger, one of the raw food nutritional pioneers in the modern West. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He did the experiment on cats, cooked meat versus raw meat. The cats who ate cooked meat, they degenerated, and when he would dissect them open, they had atrophied and dried up thyroid and adrenal glands. That's the main problem with cooked food. So yeah, if you're in old age, it's not that you don't have a need. You still will have a need, just not as much as a need as a developing child, a teenager, or a young adult, if that makes sense.
Okay, so you can't go full raw vegan. I'd think that if digestion is the biggest issue when you're old, I guess
Yeah.
that raw eggs would be the best alternative then, because they're the most easily digested animal food.
Exactly. And of course, the raw meat is also much easier than cooked meat. But the problem with like even raw meat and raw eggs is that it's not going to give you this electric force that are in the plants that are living at the time. There's an electric force sustaining it, sustaining a living plant, a baby plant. And if you take that, what you're getting from that you're not getting from the animal foods is this electric propulsion. You literally will jump out of your chair after enough weeks of eating this way. You will be like a kid jumping up and down. It's amazing. So that's why, in old age, if you want to feel very young again, this is smart. There's one lady I know, they call her Happy. She's always at the Hippocrates Health Institute. She was very sick, and she went there in her 70s. And she got on the diet, and this lady is now in her 90s, and she goes skiing in the Swiss Alps. This kind of a diet will do that for you because it's giving you something different than just physical nutrition. And of course, if you don't want to do animal foods at all, then you're going to have to end up taking like 20, 25 supplements, for the B12, the B complex, and all this stuff. But I think it's wise just when you're craving the animal food, listen to the body and have it so that you don't run into trouble.
It's interesting that you mentioned supplements because I've never believed in them. I've always thought that to make a supplement, if you synthesize it from, a bunch of toxic byproducts, that's not going to be the same thing. It's going to be toxic. And if you extract it, well, then you've gone through a bunch of chemical processes that make it trash basically. If we go by my perspective, at least when it comes to chemistry. So do you think supplements work?
I agree with you for the most part. 99% of the supplements in the market are toxic and they'll make you sick for sure. Especially the calcium supplements. A lot of the vitamin D is bullshit. It's irradiated vegetable oil. Yeah, a lot of these supplements are bullshit. The cod liver and fish oils, cod liver oil, those are completely toxic and rancid. They'll make you sick. There's actually a huge um, dogma and controversy in the Weston A. Price community, because there was a lot of people advocating the cod liver oil, which Weston A. Price recommended, but it was fresh when he would use it. And these individuals in the Weston A. Price community were dying very young. And what they all had in common was a lot of cod liver oil. So no, most supplements are toxic and trash. The only ones that I have found that do have some benefit are like the B12 and B complex vitamins. Though they are toxic, I cannot deny that in times when I myself have I noticed I became B vitamin deficient, they did help. And I believe that these vitamins can work like as a crutch. They're not the real thing, but for a time they can be a crutch until you get the real B vitamins from the real raw foods. And also many people I've worked with, when they have used like a B complex or B12 injection, it has helped them. But long term, I don't think it's ideal because it always is going to have some toxicity. But the kind of, and those are the most important for a vegan if they're going to go vegan, the B12. But for the most part, the type of supplements which I would recommend are like whole food supplements. Bee pollen, for example, is one. Kelp is another. Wheatgrass powder, but the juice is more ideal. That is the kind I'd recommend. If you're detoxing, chlorella, which is a green algae, it's great for detoxing heavy metals. And I had read an Enlightenment article where that was one of the like non-animal foods he liked, because in his own research and experimentation, the chlorella was very effective at binding to heavy metals and removing them out of the body. What else is there? And so there's like liquid ionic forms of certain mineral supplements, which I think are also very helpful. And mineral supplements, when they come in like a tablet, no matter what mineral it is, it'll calcify your body. But if you get them in a liquid ionic form, it's like small, tiny amounts of this mineral, which your body can actually absorb and utilize. And then, of course, majority of the multivitamins on the market, they are just toxic synthetic chemistries, which for the most part will damage the body. I do agree with that. Yeah.
So when you're talking about, the liquid form supplements, are you talking about something like Lugol's iodine as an example, or is that
Yeah,
toxic?
something like that, similar to that, exactly.
Okay, okay, I understand. Well,
Yeah.
the reason I asked about what Augenis got wrong earlier was
Mhm.
when you gained 70 pounds, I know that you didn't follow Augenis's diet. You ate more starch than he would recommend, and you did these soups. You did the oxtail soup and this and that. And if you'd ask Augenis about something like, bone broth or something like the soup you that I saw the recipe on your YouTube channel, he would say that that doesn't work, but clearly it did somehow work. So, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
So he would say that it's not that he would say it doesn't work. He would say you're going to have toxic byproducts as a result of cooking and eating that. And he's right, 100%. He's right. When you cook animal foods, you create a lot of toxic byproducts. And if you're very old, you shouldn't want to cook food just to grow and build. But if you're younger, like I was, and you're going to have more tolerance and you're not fighting a bad disease, it's not unwise to cook some animal foods, which will give you a lot more nutrition, because the trade-off is worth it. The trade-off for the toxic byproducts and the bioavailable nutrition that's going to come from cooking the food. And also, transitioning to only raw meat and raw food, there's going to be a very long adaptation phase, because like even in my experience, I found that when I would just go straight raw meat, I wasn't digesting it well. I wasn't feeling anything. I was like, why is, what's going on? I just feel like moving through my intestines. But then when I would do like a plate of like half raw meat and half cooked meat, I would feel incredibly well. And I knew like, no, this is not just the cooked meat, because I know how I feel on cooked meat. The cooked meat was triggering my body to produce the stomach acid and the digestive enzymes. And then it was also therefore digesting the raw meat. But with just the raw meat, I wasn't signaling for my body to produce the digestive enzymes and stomach acid. My body wasn't recognizing it. So over time, my body recognized like, okay, now I get it. This is what it is. This is raw meat. And I adapted to it. So for most people, if you've been on a lifetime of just cooked food, it's smart to transition slowly. Have cooked meat and then do slowly more raw over time. And then you'll find that you digest the raw meat just fine. And then, of course, I included a lot more starches. He did recommend that, for people who get too they start feeling too unwell because they have gone 100% raw, that they should have some cooked starches in order to remove hormones from the digestive tract. And he didn't understand this. Maybe he did, but I never saw him read or write or talk about it anywhere. But lack of cooked carbohydrates from starch or glucose can cause us to have a lot of adrenaline and cortisol, a lot of stress hormones. But he said that people can get very wiry. And in my opinion, if you can tolerate it, you should try to incorporate, if you're trying to build, you should try to incorporate cooked carbohydrates from a very safe source like white rice as often as you can tolerate. So this can prevent catabolism, stress hormones, and help put in muscle glycogen, which will create a buffer between you and your protein and fat stores so that you don't burn your muscle. You can continue to put on weight really quickly. I found that if I didn't have some cooked starch, I simply wasn't going to be able to put on weight and muscle as fast as possible.
Okay, so AGEs and acrylamides aren't an issue. It's the trade-off is
If you're fighting a disease, it is an issue. It is an issue. But
okay.
if you're a young man trying to put on mass, the trade-off is worth it. But for example, in old age, I'd recommend going on 100% raw, whether it's the 100% raw living or 100% raw primal like Autogenous. You should only do like something like white rice once every 2-3 days or once a week as you need it. But I was doing it because I wanted to grow and develop. And it did help me with that. But yes, the ages are a problem for disease, but they're not a problem for putting on mass.
So I wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned cooked meat and that it activated, the digestive enzymes and that made it digest raw meat and that raw meat wasn't being digested. Are there any other reasons as to why one would want to eat cooked meat when developing?
Only if they felt that they couldn't eat enough raw meat and needed a lot more protein and fat. Then I would first stuff myself with raw meat, and that's what I ended up doing. I would stuff myself with raw meat, and then on top of that, if I felt like I need to eat more, I would cook meat and bring some cooked meat in. Um, it's not as easy to eat as much raw meat as it is cooked meat. It's kind of difficult, but the raw meat by itself is a lot more potent at building the body. So there's a trade-off. But by the end of it, when I was really like gaining weight and muscle very fast, I was probably about 75% raw, 25% cooked. But in the beginning, I was like 5% raw, 95% cooked, and I kept moving over and incorporating more and more raw food. And of course, naturally, I wanted to go to more raw because all the cooked meat just makes you so dry. It's very drying to the body, to the glands, the brain, the thyroid. And then the raw meat doesn't do that.
Okay, other than Autogenous and Weston A. Price and Pottinger, who do you find, like the nutrition experts, who have you found is as valuable as Autogenous, so to speak, or people that you've learned a lot from?
In regards to just animal foods or nutrition in general?
Nutrition in general.
Okay, so there's Brian Clement. He's the director of the Hippocrates Health Institute. He's great, but he's very dogmatic. He'll convince anybody to go vegan, and I don't think that's smart at all. Young people shouldn't do it at all. There is Dr. Lawrence Wilson, MD. He's the pioneer of nutritional balancing or mineral balancing. Amazing MD. If you look him up, Dr. Lawrence Wilson, MD, he has probably like 1,000 articles online on many different topics and subjects, from nutrition to detoxification, and he is incredible. However, I do not agree with his nutritional protocol. I think it's too weak, and it's for people who they cannot do the raw food. The raw food is too much. They won't do the raw meat and they won't do the raw living food. That kind of a diet is more suitable for them. But because say my mother is sick, thank God she's very healthy. But say so she's sick, I'm not gonna tell. She won't do raw living food or raw animal foods. An old lady or something. They want something more stable and grounded in it. Isn't too transformative to their psyche. And his diet, for example, is a lot of cooked vegetables, like 46 ounces of cooked meat at every meal. And you do this 3-4 meals a day, with lots of supplements, coffee enemas, saunas, etc. It's a great protocol, but again, it's not the best. It's not optimal at all. That's Lawrence Wilson. Another person was Max Gerson, MD. He was a German physician who lived in the West in like the 40s. And he was healing cancer patients of cancer, and he was using like 80 to 100 ounces of vegetable juice a day, coffee enemas, and also liver juice. He was cold pressing liver juice. So it's a very unique protocol, and he wrote a book about it, and documented his basically the cases of his cancer patients who had their cancer reversed on this type of therapy. His daughter picked up the torch after he passed away, and the therapy is nowhere near as effective because they took out the liver juice, the raw liver juice. So now it's just a vegan protocol. It's not as effective. So he's one. Let's see, someone else here. Um, there is the lady from MIT, Stephanie Seneff. She's amazing with her work on glyphosate. Her work is more so on pesticides and stuff, and also about how raw water, how the body needs raw water in order to function optimally, meaning water that's sourced from like a natural spring, a natural well, or from vegetable juices, because the body is able to recognize that kind of water. But if the water goes through UV radiation, reverse osmosis, etc., it becomes discombobulated, it's dead, and the water can't recognize that kind of water. So Stephanie Seneff. Let's see who else here. The names can't, they're not on the top of my head right now. There was a lot that I learned the wrong things from. I'll say that. And those are easy to name. You know, there was the fruitarian guy, Dr. The 80-10-10 guy. I forget his. Morse was one of them. Morse was horrible as well. But there's another guy. He wrote the 80-10-10 diet, the fruitarian diet.
What's he called? Esselstyn?
No, no.
First coronary artery disease, supposedly.
Oh, Douglas Graham. Fruitarian guy, and I had tried fruitarianism, and it was a horrible experience. And at that time, I was learning from him and Dr. Robert Morse, and they're right about one thing: Morse is not Douglas Graham with his fruitarian diet. That's a horrible thing to advise people. Robert Morse is right that a lot of health depends on the drainage of the lymphatic system through the kidneys. He's correct on that, but he's totally wrong on advising people to eat high amounts of fruit as a staple of their diet. He's totally wrong on that. Fruit is horrible as a staple of your diet. But the lymphatic system and draining the lymphatic system through the kidneys, totally valid. And I think that even better than eating like a grape juice fast, if you're familiar, is to just fast on lemon water and sea salt and electrolytes for 2-3 days. And in my experience, I always have lymph moving by the second day, like a lot of lymph in my urine. You don't need the fruit because the fruit sugar is so damaging if you're eating all that fruit. Besides them two, there was the doctor on the blood type diet. I read his book and it was familiar and interesting. Who else was there? Gabriel Cousins, he's interesting. Gabriel Cousins and Victorious Koldinskas. They're both in the living food diet camp, like what Brian Clement is about. They're interesting. They have a lot to offer. Yeah, that's about. And then, of course, a lot of my own nutritional research was based off of what I liked the most was Weston A. Price's work, and then my own independent research and study of indigenous cultures, because people say a lot of things these days, all kinds of stuff. Eat only cooked steak and coffee, that's the best way, like the carnivore cult, or the vegan cult, we need no meat, go vegan, da 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 da. And through my own study, looking at indigenous cultures, and there's many of them, you can find documentaries online on YouTube these days, you can come to your own conclusion of what's right and what's not. And there is no one answer fits all. There's a lot of good, thriving indigenous cultures who are on high carbohydrate diets. And then there's a lot who are on very high fat diets. But something they all have in common is the inclusion of some raw animal foods. That's for sure. So judging all those indigenous cultures, they have a lot of raw animal food. They also have quite an amount of cooked food, many of them. Many of them eat cooked carbohydrates. Majority of indigenous cultures were eating cooked carbohydrates in addition to raw animal foods. We modern people will fare far better trying to strive for more raw foods as we age. And the reason for that is because we all have compromised developments. We all are sick to one extent or another. And ultimately, raw food is going to provide the most nutrition and the least amount of toxic burden on our body's organs. So, and each person has to experiment for themselves, and they'll find that they just feel much better, much lighter, far less inflammation, more mental clarity when they go on a raw food diet. The difference between raw, like a raw primal diet and a cooked carnivore diet is night and day.
Very interesting. Now, something very interesting about you is you know a lot about history, you know a lot about politics, and you also know a lot about how to live in a healthy manner as a human being. And what we're seeing is that the West is collapsing and the East is sort of rising. I mean, they're both, I mean, you can't say that China's, you know, quality of living is better than the US's and so forth, so on and so forth. But my question is, what countries are the most optimal to live in? Because obviously, you told, can I disclose where you're at right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're obviously in Thailand, and that's a decision that you made, and obviously you had other countries to choose from. So, what countries should one live in? How do you escape the West?
So, I am American, and I love that country so much. I love it a lot, especially the Pacific Northwest, just such a beautiful area. But the fact of the matter is that politically, economically, socially, it's going into rapid decline, and there is inevitable, absolute inevitable social, political, and economic chaos and doom on the horizon. Something which it's going to hit them like a train. They're not aware of what's happening geopolitically, globally. And it's going to affect Europe to a great extent as well. Mainly Europe and North America are going to be affected by what's coming. The most optimal places to live, if you're already in Europe or North America and you don't want to leave those countries, simply flee to the countryside and farm somewhere out there. And there's a lot of people out there, especially in the United States. There's a lot of people who are out in the countryside and they are very independent and they take a stand against tyrannical government policies, such as forcing people indoors and forcing them to have certain things inserted in them. If you want to leave the country completely, the safest and the best and the most affordable is going to be Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is great. So like Vietnam's not as affordable, but it's great. Thailand is amazing. I think it's one of my favorite countries. Laos is nice, but it's not as developed and welcoming to tourists, but still you can get away with it. India, if you're interested. Pakistan is not too bad these days, but they're having some economic troubles. The whole of Central Asia is great, meaning Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. These are very great countries. There's a lot of safety and security. You don't have to worry about militant activities or government oppression. It's the affordable lifestyle for Westerners. And then certain like the Emirates in the Middle East, Dubai, these places are expensive, but they're just amazing places to live. And those would be my priorities. Then, of course, Georgia. Georgia is another amazing place. The Southern Caucasus, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. They don't have oppressive governments. They're not Islamist regimes. They have good tolerance, and there's affordable living, clean food, clean air, clean water. So I would advise that. I am of the belief that there's a very high probability, maybe 60, 70% chance that the cities in the major cities in Europe and North America are going to be go through thermonuclear warfare. There's a very high chance that they will be attacked by nukes. The Russians and the Americans are not de-escalating anything, and there's certain circles in the Western political elite who do want the nuclear war. They want to go to nuclear war, and they're prepared, and they have very elaborate, expensive underground cities. They're bunkers, but they're cities underneath the ground. And they believe that they'll be fine, that they'll just live in there for a decade or two and then come up when all the thermonuclear radiation is gone. So there's a very high probability of this happening. And if that doesn't happen, if they don't go to thermonuclear war, there's going to be such an amazing economic catastrophe because it's based off of the US Western petrodollar system, which gives Europe and America an unfair advantage over the rest of the world. And I don't want to get too into that unless you want me to. And that system is ending because emerging powers like India, China, Russia, the whole of the Middle East and Central Asia, basically all of Asia, South American countries like Brazil, powerhouses, South Africa, many of these countries have colluded and joined together and are deciding we don't want to participate in the petrodollar system. They're going to start trading commodities using things like gold, silver, and their own national currencies instead of the US dollar. And what that means when this happens is that the European and American governments simply will not be able to print money for whatever they want anymore. The way they do from like the IMF, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve. If the US wants to go to war, they just print $1 trillion and then fund their soldiers, and they develop tanks and weapons, and they buy steel and resources from other countries, and they pay them with fake money that they print up themselves. This is what gives them the unfair advantage. And they're allowed to do that because the rest of the world has to purchase US dollars in order to trade commodities. You can't trade commodities without purchasing US dollars. But now the world is saying we're not playing that game anymore. And this amounts to the US simply not being able to print as much money as it wants, because if they continue to print as much money as they want, it will cause hyperinflation. A piece of bread will cost $300 or 300 euros if they continue living the same way. And there's Western elite who believe, they say, to hell with that, we're going to go to nuclear war. We won't tolerate a world that's not going to involve us having this unfair advantage. So we'll see what happens. Either way, it's going to shit. And then aside from this, which people aren't even aware of, the geopolitical and economic tensions, look at the social life and the cultural life. Look at how morally degenerated they are. Look at the gender war. The spouses don't even get along. Divorce is rampant. There's something called the manosphere, the red pill manosphere, and it's all about how to manipulate women, game women, and treat them like dogs. And then there's on the opposite end, there's the females who are now rotating 10, 20 men if they're on Tinder or something, right? They have 10 men paying for their rent. And they have options now. The traditional structure is destroyed. You don't have long-term marriages and these bonds and friendships that develop. The family structure is destroyed. They're not developing and raising good children. You have high crime, incredible crime in cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Chicago. The police warn tourists, don't come, we can't protect you. When you look at history, every time a great civilization collapses, it looks exactly like this, America in 2022. Looks exactly like it. So
All
it'll be
right.
interesting.
I was gonna ask you because you mentioned a big part of everyone's life is the other sex, basically. And I've obviously heard about red pill and all of this, all of that. I've read even if you know who Rollo Tomassi is, I've even read
I'm
his book,
familiar.
and I think there is wisdom in it. But you know, the manipulation of women is not something I agree with. How do you think one should conduct oneself in modern society to, you know, when it comes to dating, when it comes to the opposite sex, basically?
So the Rollo Tomassi and the Manosphere Circle, you are right that they have wisdom for the modern world, for sure. And they have wisdom for the modern world, but this would have never applied in past times when there was proper cultures and reference points in the society that told men and women how to act properly for the benefit of everybody, for the benefit of everyone, each individual in society as a whole. That's all fallen apart, and you have basically a big zoo. And when you have a big zoo, you need people like Rollo Tomassi to teach you the nature of the female animal. Because the zoo animals have been unleashed, the zookeepers are gone, the religion is gone, and you're dealing with a bunch of zebras, you know, hyenas. So how should, in my perspective personally, from my own approach, I have a very good relationship with my wife. She's my best friend. Before I met her, I knew I would never marry a Western woman, ever. That's a death sentence. She'll abuse you. You'll be done within a year. She'll take half your things. Never marry a Western woman. That's my own personal approach. Never do it. And how to approach them in date. So that's this period. Don't marry a Western woman. How to approach them in dating life. The best thing, in my opinion, is work on yourself, become strong, become successful, and attract them to you. The women who are attracted to you will make it very obvious. They will give you a glance. They will give you the stare, like as if they want, you know, your soul, and then approach those women. Don't go and just approach random women you find attractive, because it's going to be a headache. You're going to have to play these games with them. They text you, you wait an hour to text them back, only call her once a week, all that bullshit. And at the end of it, you're going to fight and it's going to be over. You wasted a lot of money, energy, and resources. Go for the women who genuinely like you and find you attractive. Approach them, be nice and kind to them, and hope for the best. That's my approach on things. With me and my wife, the reason why I married the woman is because she is an exceptional woman. She really is. She was raised in a very traditional household in the West, in America, and she had like the stoicism and values and honor, which even put me to shame. So I was like, holy shit, okay, this is like a traditional wife. You know, type there's certain woman where you're like, that one needs to get married to and be treated very well. So she was like that, and we are just so in common. Never bothered me for money, never harassed me. Yeah, I spoiled her endlessly, loved her endlessly. Amazing woman, very simple, not fake. And it's not like the majority of Western women who are very stupid, very fake, think a lot higher than themselves than they actually are. And they have the sexual marketplace is open for them. They have 100 simps on Tinder begging to sleep with them for a night. They don't understand that these men don't actually love them. They just want to ejaculate. And as soon as they have the post nut clarity, they're going to say next on to the next Tinder girl. So it's all warped. It's very difficult. But again, my advice for the dating scene would be there are certain women who are going to find you very attractive and like you. Go for those women. Don't go for anything else outside of that. It's a headache.
Yeah, this advice of not marrying a Western woman, I'm going to take that to heart. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, don't do it. Don't, everyone regrets it. You know, I mean, most guys, when they go through their first, second, third divorce with the Western woman, they finally realize, okay, I'm going to Georgia, I'm going to Russia, I'm going to Thailand, Vietnam, or I'm going to Afghanistan and Iraq, and I'm getting a good wife from there that I'm going to love and spoil, bring her back. She's going to take care of my mother. She'll clean the house. I'll love and adore her. Um, she'll have my children. She's clean. I'm not disgusted of putting my mouth on her different parts of her body, you know. And then you know, once a month or two, if you want to go hang out with the boys and use these Western women as animals, the way they treat themselves, and that's fine. They just use them as animals. Then go back to your good wife who you're making a life with at home. I hope no people find this offensive, but it's just the obvious, you know.
This is the boys interview. Only boys will watch this. I don't have any female subscribers. I hope not.
Okay. Okay.
Anyway,
I don't want to say it's only the female's fault, because Western men, this is their fault initially. When they threw away religion and brought secularism, and they put women into the workplace and removed her from her traditional role and over oppressed her and stuff. It's both the gender's fault. They did this to themselves.
something that is very interesting about your work is that you have a lot of experience with hair. You're very interested in hair, it seems. And generally, when it comes to nutrition and all the fields that one could be interested in, this is a very specific one and a very interesting one.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. What made you interested in hair?
So when I was getting deep, I was a polymath studying various different sciences, histories, esotericism, mythology, etc., yoga, meditations. But then my health started to fail, and I was poisoned by something, and I developed autistic-like symptoms. I got heavy metal poisoning, and then that also coincided with some hair loss. And I was like, okay, there's something wrong with my mind here. Something screwed up, and tried a lot of things, didn't work. Veganism was horrible. Tried raw milk, and that is really what healed my autistic like symptoms, and it slowed down the hair loss. But nonetheless, my hair was now shedding, whereas before it was not shedding at all. So I started to pay attention, and I bought myself a wooden comb, and I said, I'm gonna comb my hair, and every day I'm gonna see how many hairs I'm shedding. And I very quickly drew a correlation that, if I eat a certain thing or do a certain thing, I shed more hair. If I smoke, I shed more hair. If I drink, which I don't, but I talk to others, they drink and they shed. But I smoke hookah and tobacco. So I said, if I smoke, I shed more hair. If I eat like a junk food, I shed more hair. If I'm very stressed out and don't sleep well, I shed more hair. If I have too much sugar, I shed more hair. So I said, okay, let me just stop everything. And when I would stop everything, I wouldn't be shedding any hair. Nothing would be coming out. If I ate gluten, I would shed hair for days. If I felt like I ate something really bad and I woke up the next morning not feeling well, I'd also be shedding hair, and I feel like I have low hormones. So very quickly, I came to the conclusion that all of this is caused by me, and that this shedding of the hair is a way of the body telling me I'm freaking out. If you do the wrong things and you damage the nerves and glands, I'm going to eject the hair out because it's shocking to the nerves, it damages the nerves, and it comes out naturally. And we should pay attention to this, because if you don't listen to the hair loss, eventually you're going to have to listen to the tumor in the brain or the tumor in the kidneys and the liver. You know, the things like acne and hair loss, this is just the beginning of physical degeneration, the body coming apart and aging. So that's the way that I perceive it. And that was my theory. And then when I was like, okay, let me look at the natural world to see if I can find some supporting evidence to support my theory that individuals who physically degenerate very rapidly, they bald very rapidly, that balding is a symptom of physical degeneration, and that if you have a lot of healthy hair, it's a symptom of health and graceful aging. So let me look at the natural world. And then, of course, you look at things like the thousands of species of birds. It's hilarious that all the very colorful and beautiful birds are actually the males and not the females, like a peacock. And it's the male that has to try and impress the female. And they use like these colorful feathers, right? They have these characteristics on them, which show that I'm healthy, I'm suitable for mating, I have good genes, etc. Said, okay, well, those are the birds. And then you look at like the male lion, and they have these manes that develop. Usually like the strong alpha male lion in the pack, it's our beard, basically. They have these characteristics to show it. Then you look at like the mandrill. It's a type of baboon. And it's so interesting. In their pack of baboons, in the troop of baboons, they're grazing on grasses and herbs, and they're accumulating nutrition. And the one who accumulates the most nutrition grows the biggest, and he ends up getting very colorful face and very colorful colors on his backside. And this one, when the scientists test them, the ones with the most color have the most testosterone. And they usually end up being the alpha of the pack, and they get majority of the women. So it's like, it's obvious. So all the animals are also showing some type of like physical beauty to express their health and their mating ability. So then I looked into, well, let's see if balding is associated with various diseases and infertility. And I'm not sure if you saw, I made it very recently, a video on an alternative theory to male pattern baldness and debunking DHT.
I saw that, yes.
Yeah, and I showed how there's many studies linking various diseases to balding, that balding men always have associations with like arterial stiffness, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, insulin resistance, et cetera, et cetera. And that's because the body's breaking down, and what nature's doing, because like from a philosophical perspective, nature has a mind. There's a mind in nature, and this mind lives in every single organism. It's pre-programmed in every organism. I'm going to give you a quote from Plato really quick. Just 1 second. So this is from Plato. This world is indeed a living being, endowed with a soul and intelligence. A single visible living entity, the earth, nature, containing all other living entities, which by their nature are all related. So nature, our earth, is a living, breathing entity. It's alive and it's aware of itself. And through itself gives birth and sustenance to all other living organisms. And all these living organisms, humans to ants, have their source in nature, the original being, and they have the program of nature in them. And there's often a saying that nature is the first bitch. She's harsh, she's very cruel. And she has programmed it as such that if a man is aging prematurely and failing at her rules of life, which is go get nutrition, don't be a degenerate, develop well, conquer and spread your seed intelligently. If you fail at that, she breaks your body down to make sure that women don't find you attractive. This is what balding is. It's harsh, I know, but this is my theory on it. You look at indigenous cultures, and there are countless of them who they use their hair to signify some type of status, some type of rank, to signify their fertility. For example, the Maasai men, they have these long red dreadlocks when they're warriors and before they're married. and they dance with them and they hop with these dreadlocks, and it's a way of showing a woman his fertility. The Samburu have the same. The Afar men in Ethiopia, they have these long, curly, thick locks, and they nourish it with butter. All these indigenous cultures nourish their hair with like butter and clay and oils. And they have a mating, a courtship dance, in which they dance with their hair, and the women are supposed to choose which mate do I want. In my own culture in Afghanistan, we have something called a tan, where they dance in a circle to drums, and it's performed before war or at wedding ceremonies. And the men all have very long hair, and they dance with their hair to the drums very charismatically. And the families who are looking for a husband for their daughter judge which man is the most virile and strong based on how he dances and how healthy his hair is, how healthy he looks. This is all natural stuff. It's disturbing to most people, but it's the truth. The hair, and just like when we judge a woman, if a woman has beautiful skin, nice, thick, long hair, we go, damn, she's beautiful. I want that kind of a woman. You know, well, it's the same thing for men. But the thing is, if you get unhealthy and you damage yourself and you break yourself down, nature makes sure no one procreates with you or wants to procreate with you by aging you prematurely. That's not to say that there's not strong bald men out there. You know, of course there are. That's not to say that there's some women that do find bald men attractive. Of course there is. And all that's subjective, but on an objective perspective, the majority of men do not want a bald. We can agree with that, right? And it's in our subconscious instinct because we know it makes us feel old and aged, and we feel like it removes us from competing in the gene pool. You're going to have a lot more going for you, like a nice personality, money, et cetera, et cetera. You know, but if none of these things existed and you just lived in an indigenous tribe and you couldn't acquire a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, or do stupid things like game, and you were just a bald guy and everybody else had nice long dreadlocks, nobody would say we want this guy for our daughter. He's done some really bad things.
So I'm seeing a pattern. I'm seeing that in the majority of indigenous cultures, they prefer long hair. And if you look at something, because I'm gonna ask you about enlightenment, because I want to know your view on that. But if we take the Hindus as an example, they say have long hair. It's good to have long hair. You can hold more energy in your body, this and that. Then the Buddhists say remove your hair so that thoughts escape your head quicker. So is there any benefit to having long hair that people generally don't consider, that we don't talk about, that we don't know about?
Yeah, and this can tie into the enlightenment question as well, which I'll get more into detail later about what my perspective on it is. But we can say that enlightenment is like a pyramid. It's a gradual process of elevating your consciousness until you get to the very top and you hit it. And as you ascend this pyramid of enlightenment, there are people at different levels who have different stages which they need to graduate from. They're not meant to hit the ultimate enlightenment. They just at level 10, they should now graduate to level 11, for example. And in those lower levels of graduation, like in many of the indigenous cultures, being healthy and reproducing efficiently and raising strong children and being an honorable member of the society, this is simple enough to graduate. This is a level of enlightenment for those people. And health is a very important aspect of it. And of course, having the long hair, from what I understand, it's critical to have a heightened sixth sense and relation to nature. That the idea is that the nerves or the hair, the long hair, is an extension of the nervous system. And just how we, with a lot of our senses are dependent on our nervous system. Well, this external extension of the nervous system by way of hair can aid us in having extrasensory abilities to the external world. For example, people can research and look this up. The US Army had, I forgot which war it was. It may have been the Vietnam War, or it may have been World War I or World War II, one of the major wars. They employed indigenous Native Americans in their army who had very long hair and who had this sixth sense. And they would use them to track down enemy soldiers. So the US Army knew about this stuff long ago, and they literally employed these soldiers, and they could do it. They'd take them through the forest and stuff, and with their long hair, they'd sense, okay, the guerrillas are in this area. Just look it up, US Army, Native Americans, long hair, sixth sense.
I've heard about that. I love that stuff. But and when I told that to a group of friends when I was in high school, they were completely quiet. They were looking at me as if I was crazy, which is really funny.
And most people are, again, especially today, it's a matter of them not even graduating up a level. Just make sure you don't de-graduate and go to hell, literally, because there's people have been so manipulated, you know. There's no spiritual advancement for many of these people.
So when it comes to enlightenment, are you familiar with Eckhart Tolle, Krishnamurti? Yeah,
I am.
because their view, which is ultimately, I guess, what the Buddha was talking about, what Jesus was talking about, it has some components, and I guess Buddhism summarizes it in the best way. You've got no self, you've got, okay, now I can't remember all of them, but the most critical one is no self. Do you agree that there is no self?
Before the eyes of God, there is no self. So, like, I'm speaking to you, and if you want to go to the highest levels, really, there's just one entity speaking to one another between us two. And that takes gradual psychological progress and development to come to that stage. Because what you're doing is you're psychologically allowing yourself to die off all your beliefs, all your thoughts, all your attachments. They slowly fade away. And then when everything's gone and you're just purely in the present moment in the bliss of God, you realize you're just this embryo, this embryonic soul that's animated and sustained by God, but there is no separation. And that everything else that you thought of yourself was just a projection into the world. So this takes, it's one thing to talk about it, but then to experience it, it takes a lot of psychological growth and maturity to get there. And that's ultimately the mountaintop of enlightenment. And in traditional cultures, before things got very degenerated, and even in indigenous cultures, this is what the role of like the priest caste or the shamans were. They were the ones who were mature enough in the society to be at that level of consciousness. And because they were there, they had a lot of wisdom which they could offer for the tribe or the people or the society to make sure that everyone got along in harmony. But these ideas start to break down as far back as 2,000 years ago when the Roman Catholic Church started to abuse people and focus on just creating torture devices for heretics. They killed so many people in Europe who didn't agree with the church's beliefs. So this is long gone. But the original idea was this.
I guess because there's something that I obviously want you to talk about, and that is your books. Because I think you've written, based on what I've heard you say over here on Carnivore Camaraderie's channel, on your YouTube channel, which everyone should check out. Of course, I've already made a video recommending your channel, by the way.
Like,
Talk about your books, basically. I want to know more about them. And as I said in the email I sent you, I'm interested in the nutritional fortification book because I'm young and I always seek to expand my knowledge when it comes to nutrition.
how old are you?
I am 20.
You're only 20.
Yes, I am 20.
Oh man, you're lucky. You have a lot of time. You're really lucky you found this stuff early. And I started when I was like 20, 21 too with nutrition. But I was sick at that point, and I found a lot of wrong things before I found the correct things. So you're lucky. You're hitting autogenous. You found autogenous at a very young age. You're really lucky. Um, let's start with nutritional fortification and physical development. And I do think that that would be the most pertinent to you. That is a book that is focused on developing big, strong, robust bodies. If you're a woman who's underweight and you want to get what they call thick, that is the book for you. If you're a man and you want to get like that indigenous physique, like what Weston A. Price displayed in his books, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, natural, big, broad shoulders, it's a big body frame through nutrition. And this is not fat. I mean, like just a robust man. This is also the book for you. And it focuses on basically people go carnivore and they lose a lot of weight, right? Carnivores. It's notorious. People melt off weight. People go vegan and they lose a lot of weight. This book is focused on how do you combine macronutrients and micronutrients in a diet to build and develop a body naturally using to exercise. And that's what this book revolves around. And I draw on the work of Weston A. Price and I draw on the work of Augenis Vonderplanitz, then I also add a lot of my own experience and my observation of indigenous cultures, which I studied myself. And I show, like, look at these cultures, these indigenous cultures. They're very skinny and healthy, yeah. But look at these indigenous cultures, like Pacific Islanders, they're extremely strong, like Samoans, for example. They're an extremely strong race of people. And then I give the reason why. Why are these people so strong and built like that? And I show that it's actually because of their macronutrient intake. They're having a lot of carbs, a lot of protein, and a lot of fat. The carbs that they're having are extremely mineral dense, and the fats and proteins which they're having are coming from pastured animals. And I show why eating pastured animal foods is so important, because then I relate it to Weston A. Price's work on how the foods of certain indigenous people, when he would test it, it had 10 to 30 times more vitamins and minerals than the foods of commercial people. And then he later discovered that these vitamins and minerals, especially like K2, which you only get from grass-fed animal foods, were very specific vitamins needed for bodybuilding, for building the bones and the skeletal structure. Then I go into deeper science and why that is also valid. And so I'm showing how to accrue all the bodybuilding vitamins and minerals and macronutrients in a diet in which they digest harmoniously, where you won't have indigestion. And you can do that for a year or two, and it will build and develop you very fast. That's what that book is about: nutritional fortification and physical development. I hope that summarized it well.
It did. It did.
The next book is on nutrition and hair loss. And I basically show how hair loss is not natural, that very many indigenous cultures, the majority of them except the Maasai, the only exception, who don't have hair into old age. Like in their 90s and 100s, they don't have hair. They start balding very early. And I write about why that is. Why do the Maasai bald and all the other indigenous cultures don't? And I write about why all the indigenous cultures do not bald, they don't have hair thinning, and they don't get gray hair. So I write about the reasons why that is. I read about how to mimic that kind of a diet that supports healthy hair, which is really nutritionally based. And then I also show many of the causes for people balding. Not only is it nutritional deficiencies, but it's toxicity, glandular damage, testicular or gonadal atrophy, and environmental pollutants in their fat cells, which is causing too high of an estrogen level and not enough androgenic hormones. And my last video, debunking the DHT myth, I basically proved that it's not DHT or androgenic hormones that are causing hair loss. It's the lack of these androgenic hormones that are causing hair loss. And I explain that, again, it's due to the chemical toxicity in our organs and fat cells. And I explain how to remove those things through sauna, very intensive sauna use, and how to bring in the nutrients needed to rebuild and repair the body and have a full spectrum of minerals that are really required to maintain hair growth. And also the type of diet that I recommend for someone who's going through hair loss. If you're going through hair loss and you want to reverse it, I wouldn't recommend nutritional fortification, for example, because it may aggravate it. I would recommend first, if it's your concern, get your hair loss under control. And I recommend a specific diet for that. And once you get that under control and you know, okay, this is solid, it's over, you can then go, if you want to build the body and you're still young, go nutritional fortification. And if you do start shedding hair, you'll very easily recognize, well, what is it that I'm doing that's causing the hair to start shedding again? And you can stop that. So, and then also in nutrition and hair loss, I show how many indigenous cultures, none of them use shampoos. They all have nice, thick, dark hair well into old age. And each of them use some type of local butter or plant oil or plant extracted ferments. And they use that to wash and nourish their hair. And this brings in nutrition, not only into the hair, but also into the scalp and into the brain. It literally feeds the brain when you apply these things topically. So that's what nutrition and hair loss is about. The next one is the disease of kings. And the disease of, well, let me go to Vegan Agenda Exposed. The Vegan Agenda Exposed is the next book. And in that one, I basically show how since 1916, there's been a slow and insidious movement to replace animal fats and proteins out of the diet and substitute them with seed oils, high fructose corn syrup, and wheat, improperly prepared wheat. And that launched the whole high carbohydrate diet movement in the West, which high carbs is not necessarily a problem if it's healthy carbohydrates and your indigenous ancestors sustained on that kind of a diet. It's grown in very good soil. But the type of plant carbohydrates they were bringing into the diet were excessive refined sugars, white flours, jellies, jams, and seed oils. And the justification for this always was that because the saturated fat and cholesterol causes heart disease. And the establishment kept peddling that narrative. And finally, it wasn't until, like the recent decade or two that you have the final outcome of all this, which is, again, still saturated fat and cholesterol causes heart disease. Take your statin and go vegan. So this vegan thing is just the final encapsulation, the wrap up of everything that started 100 years ago. And I show that it's an agenda because it's being peddled and pushed by the largest and most powerful institutions on the planet. The same institutions that told everybody in March of 2020, stay inside your house and close your door. The same ones who had that power to literally
I know which
shut the whole world. Yeah. And now they're telling everyone go vegan as well. And, it's interesting. The British Queen, if people look this up, she has, look up Royal, just look up Royal Queen, British Queen Dairy Farm. And you'll find the website. And she has an amazing grass-fed dairy farm. She was drinking raw milk her whole life, and the whole family was drinking raw milk, subsisting on raw animal foods, raw dairy. But of course, they tell us to drink the cage-operated, antibiotic, pesticide-grain, pasteurized dairy, which is a totally different food. So they know in the upper echelons what the hell right nutrition is. So this is the Vegan Agenda Exposed, and it's a great book. And I basically debunked the whole saturated fat, cholesterol, and heart disease myth. And I show how saturated fat and cholesterol was above even protein, was cherished and relished by all indigenous cultures. When indigenous cultures hunted an animal, if it didn't have enough fat, they wouldn't even consume it. So it's not even like the protein is important. It's the fat and cholesterol. If you actually want to live a long time, you want the fat. Animal fat is so important. And everything's in the book. Next up is The Disease of Kings. And The Disease of Kings, I would say, was my favorite book that I wrote. And basically what I did is I got Augenis von der Planet's work on raw food, and I got Dr. Francis Pottinger's work on raw food, the experiments he did on cats. And I compared those against the rise and fall of civilizations throughout history. Dr. Pottinger's cats, when they were given cooked meat, only cooked food, they would go through physical degeneration successively over 3 generations. The first generation would get like allergies and fatigue. The second generation would get hormonally depleted, fatigue, lethargic. And the male cats would have female characteristics, and the female cats would act like males. And they'd get like a mentally ill behavior. They become antisocial and they wouldn't be playful. And then finally, the third generation of the cooked meat cats were all born with malformities and deformations or blind, and they were completely infertile, and many of them could not even like get out of bed. So I correlate that to today's modern world where infertility is rampant. Sperm counts have plummeted by like 60% in the past 40 years. You almost cannot even find an individual inside of a gym that is not on some type of hormone or testosterone replacement therapy, right? It's like no one's on raw food. That's why they need these types of therapies. Their glands are exhausted. You have the whole, like that movement where they're telling boys be girls and girls be boys and stuff, and the boys believe it. And I show how, again, in the second and third generation of the cooked cats, the cats are also confused. The boy cats act like girl cats, and the girl cats act like boy cats. And I correlate that today, that because everyone's so sick, the glands are also destroyed, just like the cooked meat cats. And this is why you can confuse them into whatever gender they are. And also you have then the mental disorders coming with the excessive cooked food. And I show how today mental disorders are rampant. There's a lack of higher spiritual values. There's a lack for appreciation of very sophisticated and spiritual objective art. For example, in the 20th century, the most famous work of art was something called the urinal. People can look it up. It's literally like, a urinal. You go into a men's restroom and you pee on in the urinal. There was an artist that built a urinal, and it was considered by the many the popular artists at the time to be a big pivotal moment in the history of art because it was so impactful. A goddamn urinal. People have to be very sick to see some kind of appreciation in that, rather than like the Da Vinci's paintings and artwork, or the traditional work that's in ancient Iraq, the Assyrian reliefs. There's so you can just sit there for hours and stare at it, and it's telling you something metaphysical, or like the Egyptian art, Indian art. So of course, I correlate all this that we're lacking these values, and people are sick today. And I point out that just 3 generations ago, we're now in 3 generations of almost 100% cooked food, but 3 generations ago in the States and even in Europe, raw milk was normal. Everyone was drinking raw milk. And you remove the most important element of the diet, because if they weren't doing, they had raw meat cuisines and dishes too, like steak tartare, Ozenwurst, which is like raw pork. This existed everywhere. Raw liver was consumed in the States 100 years ago. Not every day, but it was there in the diet. And raw, you didn't pasteurize milk. Everyone knew you drink raw milk. And in Pottinger's cats, he found that if he gave them 70% raw milk and 30% cooked meat, they wouldn't go through physical degeneration. But when you go 100% cooked food, they degenerate rapidly. He even did 70% pasteurized milk and 30% cooked meat, still the same thing, degenerate rapidly. So I go into history, and I show how in the time of antiquity, up until the gunpowder revolution 500 years ago, there's a region, geographic region called the steppe, the Asian steppe, and it stretches in the farthest, most western location of this steppe is in eastern Hungary, and it stretches across Asia, across Ukraine, across the Northern Caucasus, across Central Asia, which is like the heart of it, across into Mongolia and Northeast China. And this is basically a vast grassland, hills and grasses, hardly any trees or anything like that. And people who live there are nomads. They live in tents and they travel with their cattle, their sheep, their ox, and so on, to fresh pastures. They're always searching out fresh pastures. They're typically a warrior-like people. They live in tents. And I show how, on an almost cyclical basis, every 50 to 100 years, a group or a band of these people and they subsist off of raw food, like 80-90% raw food diet, raw dairy, raw blood, and some cooked and raw meat. They would come into the settled cultures and civilizations either in India, Afghanistan, Persia, Iraq, Egypt, Syria, Rome, Southern Europe, and they would conquer them and plunder them, and they would defeat them in warfare. And as they would do this, they would then establish their own royal dynasties. They would take over the empire and establish their own. And they would patronize the arts and sciences. They would create a brand new culture, very sophisticated, because they were very intelligent, these raw food nomads, and they would very rapidly accrue and assimilate with the sophistication of settled culture. And in time, they would forget and forego their raw food nomadic origins, and they would adopt the cooked food cuisines of settled cultures and civilizations. Cooked meat, cooked flours, all kinds of, and in settled culture, because there's a lot of commerce and bazaars and businesses and people, it's cosmopolitan, you have access and taste to a lot of sweets. Even back then, they were making a lot of sweets, pastries. And so they would lose their taste for that. And they weren't aware that the raw food is what gave them their superior dominance intellectually and physically on the battlefield. They would adopt these cooked foods, and within 100 years, their own royal dynasty and the whole culture which they came to establish would also degenerate. Eventually, the male kings would come who only were concerned about their harems, their sex, and they wouldn't actually take care of the kingdom. The people would become very weak. And in time, another wave of raw food nomads would come in, conquer them, replace them, and the same cycle would continue to repeat. Raw food nomads come and conquer settled cooked food, gluttonous, lazy people. It keeps happening and happening. And I give the cases. Look at this. Here you go. Here you go. Here's India. Here's Persia. Here's Iraq. Here's Egypt. The same thing keeps happening. And in Europe, it's no different. In Rome and Macedonia, where the Greeks were. So that, and then I also show how the aristocracy, traditionally, the aristocracy was, they always had meat foods in settled culture, meat foods reserved for them, whereas the peasants were forced to consume almost like a plant-based diet, cooked plant-based diet. And I give the references for that. And I show how the aristocracy, the most common disease amongst them was gout disease. And most of them would end up dying from this. And it's because they ate a lot of cooked meat. And this is the problem with cooked meat. It's so concentrated in minerals like zinc, selenium, phosphorus, and metals like iron, that when you cook it, you destroy the ionic bonds that bind these minerals together. And when you consume that, these dried, cauterized minerals and metals dry up your glands and organs. They dry out what the Chinese call the water element of the body. And thus it causes gout disease because of the uric acid crystals and the purines and the iron overload. And I show how in traditional cultures of antiquity, bloodletting to release blood was very common because they understood that they're all being poisoned by excessive toxicity from the animal foods. And so the whole book is basically a historical and nutritional piece for why raw food is superior to cooked food, and how the conquerors throughout history were all on raw food. And the patronizers of very high sophisticated art, whether it was in Persia, Afghanistan, Iraq, or Egypt, or in India, were raw foodists. That's Disease of Kings.
Yeah, you have two more books, right? There's one on longevity, and then there's another one, I think.
So I did a vegan agenda. I did the hair loss, nutritional fortification. This is the Disease of Kings. And the fifth one is longevity. It's called living food and bioenergetic nourishment. And this one is about what I was talking about in the beginning of this interview, where I said for old people who do not have leaky gut and their gut is fine and they want a lot more energy and they don't want to do a raw primal diet, they can go on the living food diet and they can learn about that and learn about the reasoning behind it and how that works and functions. And that's what that book is about. Which again,
are those all the books?
Yeah, five in total.
Okay, fantastic. Because obviously, I want anyone who watches this interview to know that these books exist so that they can read them, so that they can, first of all, read them, support you, and make the world a better place. Because that's why we write books, to make the world a better place.
Yeah, of course, we definitely.
I have one final question, just because you mentioned it. This thing about bloodletting and iron overload, can that happen even if you're eating 100% raw?
It's very difficult. It'll take a very, very long time to happen. When you eat cooked, it will happen instantly. If you eat a lot of cooked beef, it will happen within like a year or two. And I don't know if you're familiar with like Frank Tufano.
I am.
And I love these kinds of channels because they experiment on themselves publicly, then they show what happens rather than these keyboard warriors who like belong to the carnivore cult or vegan cult and they'll say bullshit, carnivore this. No, it's like we have real young, healthy people online experimenting with themselves and they show what happens. And again, that kind of thing is very common. If you eat too much beef, you're going to get the iron poisoning. And most of the time, if you don't listen to the initial symptoms, which is going to be like eye bags, fatigue, lethargy, excessive dryness, and insomnia. For him, a big one was insomnia. He wouldn't sleep for days. Me, myself, even when I was doing nutritional fortification, I sensed it coming, but I knew what was happening and I stopped immediately. So the symptoms didn't get too bad. But for most people, they're not going to understand that the cooked beef is causing gout symptoms, insomnia, and dry glands, and they'll just keep going until it's almost irreversible. It can be irreversible. It can be very damaging. Raw meat, it's not as common because, again, with raw meat, you aren't drying up the minerals. You aren't cauterizing them. And so the body is actually able to absorb and utilize them. Whereas when you cook the beef, the iron becomes a free oxide. It becomes a free radical. Your body can assimilate some of it, but a lot of it just damages your organs and glands as it circulates. And your body doesn't know how to store it or how to use it properly. And also, based off of Agenis's work, when you consume raw meat, the body over time is able to recognize it very easily that, okay, this is what this is. And it chooses selectively, I need this nutrition from the beef or meat, and I don't need this. I don't need excessive iron. But when you cook it, it's like this broken package that comes into the body. The body goes, okay, I think this is a steak again. Let me produce enzymes and acid, just break the whole damn thing apart and see what comes out of it. Let's see what I absorb. And then it goes, oh shit, it has iron in it. That's too much. I didn't want that. So this is based off of Agenis's work that when you cook a food, the body's not able to be selective about what it wants from it. But also, even if you're eating a lot of cooked meat, you can buffer the negative consequences by consuming a lot of raw dairy. And that's what the Maasai do. That's what the indigenous Abkhazians of the Caucasus who live to like 120, they're like on a 60, 70% raw dairy diet, got lots of carbs. Or like the Hunza in the mountains between Afghanistan and Pakistan, they were recorded in a blue zone study. They do a lot of raw dairy. The reason why the raw dairy protects you from this is because the raw minerals, the raw calcium buffers the iron absorption and it pulls some excess of iron out of the body. So raw dairy is important.
Extremely interesting, and I guess that's why Ogenus, I don't, maybe it was intuitive, maybe it was deliberate, but obviously he recommended a bunch of raw milk. So maybe that was an intelligent, that was by intelligent design, basically.
Yeah, and there's healing benefits in raw milk that you're not going to get from meat or eggs. All the foods do different things. Like my autism, when I reversed my autism, it was through raw dairy. The raw meat wasn't going to do it. Raw eggs wasn't. It was literally the raw milk because it has the soothing qualities, the detoxification qualities, the minerals, the enzymes, hormones, bacteria, and many other elements we're not even aware of that help heal. And according to Ogenus, the best food to detoxify the glands and organs is raw milk.
Did you ferment it when you were consuming it?
No, I was doing a lot of it just like pure raw milk, and I'd ferment it into kefir and have it as kefir too. But I find that the raw milk is way stronger for healing and detoxing. If you can't absorb and digest it, you can ferment it into a kefir, but it's not as strong, and I don't think it'll be as effective as raw milk, unfortunately.
That's extremely interesting because I only ferment it. I can't handle raw milk if it's not fermented. But that's, again, that's a very interesting perspective. Argenis always said ferment it if you can because that's superior because you get the bacteria, but I haven't heard of this. Anyway, and I'm
He
not
was
saying that
right.
it's wrong.
Yeah. He's
Actually,
right that it's beneficial for the bacteria, but the thing is also when you pre-digest it, they are consuming some of the glutathione and the calcium, and they're being broken down into different components. So just in my experience, the raw milk was a lot more healing. The kefir is great too, and it's more digestible and absorbable. But that when I would feel, because I came to a point where I would feel it like, okay, if I drink this raw milk, I literally feel it going into my brain and like healing, cooling something. And the kefir, when I would drink that, it wasn't doing it.
that's very interesting. Well, Varis, I could ask a million more questions. I could, we could continue talking forever, but this has to come to an end, someday. You've got a YouTube channel, obviously. I've told everyone to go to subscribe to you. You've got books on Amazon, both in digital form and paper, the physical books. So you can get any one of them, to the person who's watching. Is there any other way to support you?
No, as of now, they can just come to my YouTube channel. I have my Amazon books, and that's how they can support me.
Well, with that said, thank you for agreeing to do this interview. I'm sure that the person who is watching has benefited immensely, and I hope the rest of your day, the rest of your days, not just this day, are going to be fantastic.
Thank you.